Good evening. Welcome to the University of Tasmania's Island of Ideas Public Talks series. Tonight's talk, Hope and Leadership with Rosie Batty, is proudly brought to you in partnership by the University of Tasmania and the Tasmanian Leaders Program. My name is Carmel Hobbs. I'm the Acting Director of the Trauma Informed Practice Lab here at the University of Tasmania, and I'm a gender-based violence researcher specialising in youth intimate partner violence. I'm a victim survivor, an advocate and an educator, and I'm very excited to be here with you tonight in conversation with the incredible Rosie Batty. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge that this evening we are broadcasting from Lutruwita, Tasmania, Aboriginal land, sea and waterways. In recognition of the deep history and culture of the island, we acknowledge the traditional owners of Lutruwita, the Palawa people. As we gather in the shadow of our mountain, Kunani, and talk about resilience and hope, we reflect on the strength and leadership of the Palawa elders past and present. Their deep history of storytelling, knowledge sharing and caring for land sustained their people and this land long before colonisation. We acknowledge their history of dispossession and stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history. We pay our respects to elders past, present, to those who did not make elder status, and to members of the Aboriginal community who join us tonight. We also acknowledge the disproportionate rates at which Aboriginal women experience domestic and family violence and the ongoing leadership role of Aboriginal community in addressing and preventing family violence and violence against women. We join with First Nations people to end family violence in all communities and work towards gender equality. We also pay our respects to all victim survivors. We acknowledge the terrible impact of family and domestic violence on individuals, families and communities, and the strength and resilience of victim survivors, including children and young people who have experienced or are currently experiencing domestic and family violence. On behalf of the University of Tasmania, I would like to extend the warmest welcome to you all. So the Island of Ideas program is a symbol of the university's commitment to provide us all with critical conversations and diverse perspectives necessary to address complex issues and drive meaningful change for Tasmania and beyond. Tonight's talk, I hope, will be no different. It is hard to name another person who has transformed personal tragedy into a national movement as powerfully as Rosie Batty. In 2014, Rosie experienced what most of us can only imagine as an unimaginable loss, the tragic death of her son Luke. Rosie channeled her grief into an unstoppable drive for change and became a voice for domestic violence survivors, raising awareness and prompting vital changes in Australia's family violence system. In 2015, she was named Australian of the Year, and in 2019, an Order of Australia in recognition of her advocacy that spurred a national conversation on domestic violence. She has faced unimaginable heartbreak, yet found the strength to challenge systemic failures, particularly within the family law system, where too many voices were previously unheard. Despite closing the Luke Batty Foundation in 2018, her influence endures. Rosie remains a household name, a testament to resilience, courage and leadership without official authority, and with immense moral strength. Today, Rosie's message is as relevant as it ever was. We live in a time when public trust in leaders is often questioned, and many feel powerless in the face of large-scale societal problems: child homelessness, climate change, war. But Rosie's journey shows us that leadership doesn't always come from those with delegated authority. Leadership can emerge from those who refuse to remain silent in the face of injustice. Her journey reminds us that ordinary people, when driven by hope and compassion, can lead extraordinary movements and influence significant social change. And tonight, we have the chance to learn from Rosie's experience, how she turned personal pain into a beacon of hope and change. There's lots for us to talk about. Tonight's talk is about hope and leadership, but it is in the context of domestic and family violence. Some people will be here and will be watching because you want to hear from Rosie because you have your own personal experience with that. And regardless of in addition to that, but also we are here talking about an issue that can raise big feelings for people. Sometimes that happens in the moment, sometimes that happens later. It can happen tomorrow, it could happen next week. We've got obviously some supports there that you can reach out to. Please do that. Be kind to yourselves tonight, be kind to each other. Rosie, will you do us the great honour of kicking off this conversation and join me over here?
Thank you. Thank you for coming. It's a really warm welcome, and I really do appreciate it. And Hobart is such a beautiful place. I've been many times over the years, which is one of the reasons why I was really keen to come to this event. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. So my first question for you is, why did you decide to write a book about hope, and why now?
I wish I had some great answer, but to be frank, it was during one of our extended lockdowns in Melbourne. I'm not sure how bad you got it here, but it was pretty tough in Victoria, as you probably remember. And I think I fared really quite well. I was very fortunate. I live on nearly 3 acres. I've got dogs as companions. I felt I could walk them within my 5-kilometre radius. And I didn't put on weight. I actually lost weight. I didn't make sourdough bread, but I did spring clean every nook and cranny of my house. So I felt that it was actually an interesting time for us all, wasn't it? And I felt I was fortunate, and so I decided to make the best use of that time. And it was really a circuit breaker for me, which came with some mixed emotions, but I think sometimes being forced to slow down and take stock and sit with deep feeling, as uncomfortable as it was, I probably didn't realise I had more elements of grieving to do for Luke, and realised that my advocacy and campaigning and being busy all of the time had really been a welcome distraction from a lot of my pain. And I guess I couldn't avoid it any longer. So at one of those periods of time, I reached out to Bryce, who had written my other book with me, and we'd always talked about the possibility of writing another book. And at the time I can't remember the exact timing, but I'd been looking at working with the ABC, doing a series of interviews and conversations called with 1+1, and they were interviewing really, again, amazing people. And it was really along the themes that I'd learned from the leadership talks I'd done here and in Tassie, here and in Melbourne, about accidental leadership. People like me who didn't see themselves as a leader at all. I kind of thought, well, Barack Obama and those people are leaders, not the likes of me. I felt very uncomfortable being elevated into this kind of category. So I felt it was a really interesting conversations to have with people who had found themselves through tragedy, through adversity, who had become accidental leaders. So I had a vision for a book that would be interviewing and including the stories of other people, but the book wasn't supposed to be about me. And Bryce had the idea that he felt that the book should be called Grace. And this was before your wonderful Grace Tame. But to be completely honest, I've just thought I have not been graceful on many occasions, and I couldn't, in all consciousness, sit with the title called Grace. And somewhere I came up with the term, the word hope, and I didn't really realise just how the timing of my book and the title and how much it meant. So the book was supposed to be released 2 years ago, but again, with the delays with COVID and things like that. And anyway, it landed earlier this year. It was perfect timing. it actually does include the stories of other people, but the new person who is working with me on the book decided it should be more about me, which I was quite indignant and uncomfortable about initially because I didn't think people would remember me. And I didn't know that they'd be still interested in me. But as she started to do the research and putting it together, she felt there was so much that needed to be shared and so much needed to be said. So after I got over my indignation that she hadn't followed my instructions, I realised she was right. And she's come up with a wonderful book that I wish I could claim I'd written myself. But I think a book, when you work with another writer, comes from both of you. It's a very special relationship that you end up crafting where they clearly know everything about you, and all of the good and the bad as well. So it was really important for me to write a book about the elements in my life that were less than perfect, that the image that people have of me, I felt was an impossible image to live up to. And I felt quite imposter-like and fraudulent. And I think that people who are in a situation like mine, which are navigating pain, tragedy, adversity, sadness, grief, you know, it's an ugly journey. It's a hard journey. There are many parts of that journey that you're not your best self and you have shame around. And I wanted to be really honest about that because I feel that people should be able to recognise their own imperfection in my book so that it does give you hope. That, you know, in the midst of everything that you would never think you could survive, I'm one of many people that don't just survive, but they learn to live with their pain and they navigate a life that it's not easy to create, but I've been able to continue to find a space that I can say I'm okay.
Which makes me think of a question that somebody has written to us, and I'll just read it to you because I think it kind of follows on nicely from what you've just said. This person says, "Hi Rosie, I have experienced a significant traumatic event in my life, and one thing that really worries me is that this event has the power to harden me and to disconnect me from others. How have you stayed open-hearted and connected throughout your trauma and loss? And what tips can you provide to others who visit the darkness but desperately don't want to stay in it?"
You know, I don't want to get emotional. I don't know, sometimes I do. I think of my family, my grandmother who lived till she was 100, my father who's going to be 92. I think of who has influenced me in my family as role models of kindness, generosity, authenticity, really decent human traits that I aspire to replicate. And they've influenced me enormously. And I feel very fortunate that I can say that I've got those family members that I've been able to have that modelled for me as a little girl and all through my life. I think it's also choice. And the day that Luke was murdered, and some of you will remember me speaking to the media, and I said no one loved Luke more than Greg, his father, and no one loved Luke more than me. And I made a choice. I did not want to be bitter. I did not want to be trapped through in anger and resentment. Now, for me, it was perhaps easier in that the police had shot Luke's father, so I didn't have to deal with a criminal trial, the pain that would bring, and the difficulty of him still being alive when he'd murdered our son. But I think I have tried to be a person that chooses to be better in the best way I can. Now, I don't live up to my expectations all of the time, but I reflect a lot. And sometimes in the moment I have been angry and I've responded in a very defensive or an angry way, and I've hurt people. And I don't like that feeling, and I don't want to sit being that. And so I strive to be that better person. And I think if you allow yourself to say that you deserve to find moments of happiness. Nobody has this permanent state of happiness. You deserve to find that. There is no reason for you to hold on to pain. No one who, would want you to deliberately do that to yourself. So I feel, as hard as it is, that sometimes it's a choice. Now, I do think I have potentially protected myself in some ways. And I think it's a long journey, and I think there are periods in your life where you are having to really wrestle with feelings that, particularly through grieving, when I I didn't lose him, he was murdered. I didn't know what I was suffering from at any given time, but I know now in reflection, I was impacted by PTSD. I was suffering from trauma. I had heightened anxiety, and I was dealing with grief. And on top of that, I probably had menopause. And I was bloody Australian of the Year at the same time. No wonder I was having meltdowns and being less than graceful. But, that was an amazing opportunity. It was a platform that I was given that I knew could make change. And I was suffering from a little bit of massively imposter syndrome, feeling undeserving and, that I was going to screw up. So I overcompensated in that year alone, and I was here speaking at different times. I spoke at 250 events, and that did not include meetings with prime ministers and leading politicians or media interviews. So you can imagine that every single day I was somewhere speaking to someone, and I wouldn't change that, but I realised it was unsustainable. And the following year I did 180, and I went further out to regional areas, speaking to country towns and regional locations. And I've been across into, remote Aboriginal areas. I've been to Papua New Guinea. I've been to even Norfolk Island, to really kind of make the most of the opportunity I've been given. And it's been an amazing journey. And it was such a bittersweet journey, because if it was for any other reason, it would have been the best time of my life. Yeah. But it was with pain. But, so I think I choose to try to be a nicer person, the person I like to be. I enjoy meeting people. I like people. And so, not everybody, but I try to be the better person. Yeah. And I'll never live up to my own expectations, but I can keep trying. And so I think to be kind to yourself. I don't know that I'm always that, but I recognise I need to be kind to myself. And I will say that a lot of my really great people who I've learned to really, my bestest of friends, they've got my back. They are there through all of your pain and all of the ugliness that they've seen of you. And I think that's helped me get back to being who I can say I am now, because they didn't turn away. Some people did, Some people did, and everyone will share with you that when you go through some kind of massive event, you will have people that surprise you, that do, you know, show kindness and thoughtfulness in ways that you never could expect. And then there'll be some that you recognise you don't hear from, you no longer see, and you had expected that friendship or relationship would always stand the test of time, and it doesn't. So I think, you know, we're all flawed. We're all on a journey, and I see my journey as a learning journey, and I don't think I'll ever stop learning about myself and about, you know, about humans, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had assumed when we saw that phenomenal amount of work you did when you had won Australian of the Year that you must have had this epic-sized team of people behind you. But you weren't. You were doing that all on your own.
Yeah.
And so that makes me wonder what thoughts you've got around how, as a community, we can support people who are doing advocacy work, that's hard advocacy work, in the way that they want to do it.
Look, I don't know why anyone would want to do advocacy, quite frankly. I was, you know, I think you can support people, I guess, by being interested in what they're doing. You know, I have people who I had expected that would follow my journey. They're still friends, but they don't ask me what I do. They don't come to any of my events. I doubt that they've bought my book. But they'll wave to me and have a good chat when they see me out. So, you know, I think, what can you do to support people? Well, I guess it's understanding it takes a toll on you. Sometimes when you're speaking out and when you are, whether it's sharing your story or advocating or standing up for something that you clearly can see is wrong, you will have pushback, and you'll have people who are unkind, and you'll have people who deliberately actually say some very cruel things. So I think, you know, it's being able to support those people in ways that show, kindness, but also recognising that you may not agree with everything that somebody says, but there's no room and reason for people to stoop to, really ugly trolling and things like that. And that's exactly what you do inherit, unfortunately. You don't realise when you clearly start, you know, trying to make change for humanity in ways that you can only see that are going to be beneficial. You can't anticipate that some people are going to say, well, she's benefiting out of her son's death. Look at her, why she, you know. So there's judgment that people place that, you know, that, you can't make people like you, and you can't make people, I guess, always see your intention, but you don't go looking. You don't go looking for the comments. And, you mentioned that this is going to be up on YouTube. I won't be looking, because I can tell you now there'll be some, if there's space for comments, there will be positive and there'll be negative, and some of the negativity is quite abysmal. And I genuinely don't know who those people are, but clearly, the harm that it causes if you allow yourself to be affected by it. So the best thing is not to look, and then you think everybody likes you, just like you lovely people here tonight.
Yeah, that's kind of the best way to do it, right? Yep. And that, I guess, leads me to thinking about, sort of on a less vile and vicious level, is, I guess, one of the things I find really difficult in doing kind of research and advocacy around this issue is I often get asked by people who are very busy people who are very well intentioned and want to make change, what's the one thing that we need to do? How do we fix this? And we know that, complex social issues require complex solutions. What do you say to people who are in leadership roles who aren't yet in the same place that you might be in terms of their journey in understanding the complexity of a big social issue?
What do I say?
Yeah.
You can be advocating about anything. You can be advocating about climate change. I think for me, I guess I don't. I avoid the media a lot more than I once did. I'm more selective about when I do speak out, and when I speak out, I do with intent, and I try to be really measured in what I say. And I guess I've had a lot of practice over the years, and probably was quite intuitive in how I did work with the media back then as well. But there isn't one quick fix, and there isn't one solution about anything. And what people don't want to hear is, actually, it takes all of us. It takes all of us. We keep thinking, like we look at, oh, it's got to be the government, and it's got to be those, and it's got to be those. Well, actually, the change starts with all of us individually. And I've realised that, some of us are more resistant about certain things, but in time you kind of realise that you've, shifted your thinking, and you've grown in appreciation of some of the things that you dismissed outright, and over. I'm in my 60s now. I know you wouldn't think it, but I've changed a lot, I'm sure, in my views from when I was a little girl, and I think it's okay to keep, informing yourself or being challenged and rigid, and then kind of recognizing that maybe you need to kind of be a bit more receptive. But I don't think any of us find that easy. I don't think it's easy at all. But what I have learned is, I've been speaking about family violence for 10 years, and the stats are still the same. And one would think, well, nothing's changed. That was, maybe I've wasted my time, but I know things have changed. Not enough. But what I have learned is change takes a long time. And it's only when you look back to where you were 10, 20, 30 or 40 years ago that you see any changes happened at all. So that's what gives me hope. Because I can be in despair again tomorrow when I switch on the news and may see another woman that's been murdered, because we are still experiencing one woman a week being murdered. And I'm still horrified that I'm saying the same messages, quoting the same stats, and still educating people. So that's something I've learned, that people who have been working in this area for a very long time, maybe all their working lives, have been doing this for a long time.
And doing that, and you write about this in your book, it takes resilience. It takes a lot of hard work and strength and support to kind of keep going when things feel like they're not getting better, when they are changing. And so how is it that you kind of describe or define resilience, and how do you think we can cultivate it when it's hard to draw on?
Again, I think I was born into a family that was stoic, resilient, emotionally, perhaps not supportive. There's, I come from a family that I love dearly, and I think I've got a really great family, but it doesn't mean that it's a perfect support network. And I think often, your family who you love the most can sometimes be the ones that you struggle with to understand you, or to even be as supportive as you'd like, because they feel challenged too with whatever may be happening. So I feel that I know resilience through how, again, it's been modelled to me all my life from people who were really important to me and have influenced me. But I think I lost my mother when I was 6. She died suddenly. Overnight, my father was left with 3 kids under the age of 6. Me, my brother Robert, who is 4, and my other brother James, that was a year old. We never, ever have got over that. Not one of us have ever married and had a permanent relationship. So the trauma a child experiences when they lose somebody, their mother or a parent like that, is a lifelong trauma that I only really understood probably in my mid-40s when I studied a diploma in community welfare and studied trauma and attachment theory. And it was really like an awakening for me to really understand what trauma was. We use trauma as a term now very, very frequently, but it's actually really quite a new, relatively new realisation of how deeply so many of us are affected by trauma in one way or another. So I feel like I started to learn what resilience was probably when I was a 6-year-old little girl and having to navigate a life without my mum. And you don't just get resilience. It is a muscle, I think, that you keep kind of strengthening. And some of us, I have more strength than others for varying reasons, and who knows, it's personality, it's life experience, it's whole environmental factors, and it's all, who knows why. I guess for me, no matter what, I have always known I will survive. I will get through this. I will push. It's in me. It's just there. And it doesn't mean it's easy. And there have been times when I can tell you I was drinking a bottle of red wine to get through that day. And smoking, picked up smoking again. And sometimes surviving and getting through is turning to things that are not healthy, but they are. You're turning to them and you're getting through and surviving with them. And then there is a point, I know again, I've been very fortunate that some incredible kindness and support has been offered to me, and I've been able to really take myself to kind of take that time to, as a circuit breaker, to heal a little. And now I'm really healthy. And one of the things that I have always wanted to do is walk the famous walks around the world, and I've always wanted to do that. Many years ago I did trekking in Nepal and thought that was just the most life-changing experience. And so when Luke, I no longer had Luke, I started to get these opportunities to do some trekking in other parts of the world, and went back to England and trekked in the UK, which obviously is where my family live, where I'm from, and it was so beautiful. And I really feel that was when I started my real healing. I was overweight, I was bloody unfit, and I think some people doubted I was ever going to make it. But anyway, well, not necessarily youth, but I was younger. But that really made me realise I can enjoy life again. I can have moments where I can feel happy. And at the end of every walk, I went into a nice pub and had a gin and tonic. And that's contentment.
Nothing like a good gin and tonic. You said earlier that you originally wanted your book to be, about other people, and then through, a process, it became focused on you, but you do still have lots of stories of other people in your book. What is it about those people and their stories that was special to you, or that made you want to include them in the book?
I think In fact, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Melbourne, and this lady was there again. But I remember meeting a woman at one of my book launches with my first book, and she lived in Adelaide, and she was queuing up for me to sign the book, and she quietly said, "I lost my children too, Rosie." And I thought, and I said, "Am I going to be okay?" And she said, "You learn to live with it." And I've never forgot those words. And I've seen the lady twice. Her name is Glyn. Anne O'Neill, who's in my book, it must be over 25 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, her ex-partner shot dead her two small children and blew off the bottom of one of her legs. And his family still blame her. And the community didn't support her. And that's victim blaming. Now, how lucky have I been that we've shifted enough that some people blame me. Some people blame me for Luke's murder, thinking I didn't do enough, what it was I doing, and blaming me for not doing enough. But, you know, the overwhelming compassion and all of the amazing, beautiful support I've had reinforces my faith in humanity, I can tell you, because when you have something terrible happen, the kindness and generosity that people show you is quite astonishing, and it really makes a difference. I even had people coming with toilet rolls. Yeah, you didn't expect me to say that. You don't know how to laugh. But yeah, the generosity, but the thoughtfulness, you know, the basics of cooking, groceries and things like that, even included toilet rolls. So I think with resilience, it's, you know, I guess it's what makes you get up that day. You may have a shower and you may not. You may eat, you may not, but you do get up that day. And then you get up the next day. And then you've got up 3 days in a row. And then, you know, so it's, I don't know that I would say I've got anything that I feel is special. I just don't know how else to be.
Yep. And so the stories that you included obviously have a special meaning to you and have, you know, found their way in their book for a purpose.
Yeah. Sorry, you're right. It's so Anne, all of these people I have met on my journey, and they have experienced, you know, same tragedies, and they have channeled their grief, their pain in ways similar to myself. And they helped me see that I wasn't alone. And there is a shared kind of understanding when you've experienced something like that. You know, being one of those people that no one wants to be, one of those stories that people share, to know that you'll be that person that people will point or talk about and say, that's her, you know, the one that lost her son, that, you know, that happened. It gives you some comfort to know you are not alone, and that other people through great pain and loss will find a way to channel that. You know, whether it's setting up a foundation and in whatever, you know, and fighting for and campaigning for, or whatever you choose to do, it's giving you purpose, and it's keeping their memory alive. And so I think to be able to share their stories, and they're amazing. It just shows that just how many of us there are, because I think everybody would say, if that happened to me, I would never survive. If that happened to me, I could never get up. If that happened to me, I'd never get over it. And for some, that may be how it is. But for a lot, they do find that strength. I can't say how long it will take. Every journey is different. It doesn't mean that you don't have days of sadness or moments of, of pain or, and for me, I see Luke's friends and they're now in their early 20s and I can't imagine, they're amazingly grown up. And I can't imagine that Luke he should be there. I can't imagine. So it's not easy, but it's got easier.
Yep. And you've done some remarkable work. Like you've created big change, had huge, you've kind of changed the conversation in Australia in lots of different ways, and you've had impact on, legislation and on policy and on media, and, you created a foundation and you've started campaigns and you've done, so much as well to help individual people. And, it's huge. And I guess one of the things, as, you may get to a point where you want to, to shift and to spend less time in that space and doing other things. And so what can we take away from those lessons that you've learned around advocacy? Like what's your kind of...
So I think what I've learned about advocacy is it's never enough. It is never enough. And you can't fix everything and you can't save people. You can only be and do as much as you can do. And it's okay to give your time some space, and you need to start to recognise, sometimes when you need some quiet time, you need to remove yourself, you need to take some time out. So I do the things that I enjoy more and do less of the things or none of the things that I enjoy less. I'm lucky I enjoy most things I do and say yes to the things, and I don't think I've ever really regretted. There was one event at the Masons. That was quite entertaining. I couldn't believe their little rituals. But that was entertaining on one level. But I think that most of the time, I can't think of anything where I've gone, I really don't wish I hadn't done that. Sometimes it's at 4 a.m. and I'm thinking, why the bloody hell have I got to go to the airport again? But when I get to where I'm going, it's all worth it. So I think it's about recognising that life is short, life is precious. What I enjoy is what I need to make more time to do. And to just realise that you can give and give and give and people will keep taking. And so how do you balance enough that nourishes yourself as well? And so I think for me, I don't know whether anyone ever gets it right. I think there are periods of time where you learn through experience to manage yourself a little bit better, and to recognise when you are feeling overwhelmed and triggering. For me, but feeling overwhelmed is very triggering. So I try to reduce those feelings as much as I can. So that's got easier. What was the question? My answers are so long, I can't even remember the question in the end.
No, I'll go on to another one.
They've forgotten as well, so it doesn't matter.
You talked also before about, I guess, this concept of being an accidental leader or being a leader in not a formal leadership position. What are the positives of being in that kind of a space?
Well, contrary to what people think, you don't make loads of money. Which is, I think that's the perception that, some of my people who don't admire what I do would be very critical of thinking I'm somehow banking loads of cash and living this massive house and having, what What was it again?
What's good about being a leader, but not in an
Leader.
official kind of a sense?
I think I still don't truly consider myself a leader. I still consider myself as an ordinary person that had a horrendous thing happen to. And I want to be that ordinary person that is navigating life the best way I can with a stigma. So I try to be how I've always been. People tell me, and I think again, I role model from my father and my family, genuine and authentic. I mean what I say. I can be too direct and I can be very blunt. So I try to balance that a little. So I try to, I realize that sometimes people recognize who I am, but I always jump out of my skin when people kind of say, oh, like they surprise me at times because I don't expect people to know who I am. So I just go around, like everybody else, not expecting people to know who I am. And just when you think you have got tickets on yourself, people have got no idea who the hell you are. So it's really easy, really easy. And it's got easier. At one time, I used to really worry. I'd think, oh, I'm meeting these people. And when they meet me, they'll realise I'm not as smart as they think I am. And I'll say some really silly things and, I won't meet their expectation. And I used to worry like that. I don't really worry so much about that anymore. I just hope that I relate to people in a nice, down-to-earth way, which is what I've always been.
Well, this question might be a challenge. Maybe, I don't know. And maybe you don't want to answer it because maybe it will channel your blunt directness. And we kind of talked about this a little bit out the back. There are people in this room and who are watching now who I know have to respond to, some pretty vile and inappropriate and misplaced responses when we're talking about domestic and family violence, right? And an example of that might be, a conversation or, some kind of work that someone has done around the space and getting a response from someone that's quite positive and, this is really good, this is really important. But it's really hard to be a man these days because you can't do anything without getting into trouble. Where do you go with that?
It's really funny, actually, because I don't know whether you here in Tassie are following the CFMEU saga. Does anyone remember John Setka? Oh, yes. He was a big one for me. He made a comment some years ago. Mark Knight did a cartoon. It's in my book, actually. Because of Rosie Batty, men's rights have been reduced. Oh. And so I went on the project to comment about that, and I said, well, if it's reduced your right to be abusive and violent, well, that's fine by me. Yeah, I think, this is the thing, isn't it? It's about entitlement. And when people are feeling uncomfortable, but that's about them picking up on this is not socially acceptable. We are not excusing, we're not minimising, we're not turning a blind eye. This is not tolerated, this is not acceptable, and it's for all of us to be part of that change. So, look, I do understand that some men and children are victims of female violence, but I don't know many men who are having to seek refuge and live in fear of their lives. And so I think, when I know the statistics, which are 1 in 3 women will experience physical violence in their lifetime, and 1 in 4 children will be impacted, and 1 woman a week is being murdered. And I know that the statistics tell us that 94% of those that commit violence are men. It's a bloody uncomfortable truth. But we have to sit with that and acknowledge it and work out what are we all going to do to shift that. And it will take time and it will take generations. But we're all on that journey, and that's why we're here tonight, I have no doubt.
Yep. And then I guess another question that kind of came through, or a theme within the questions that have come through from the audience, is when you're working in places and spaces where you can see that things aren't how you want them to be, you know, it's not, you know, you don't have the resources, or things aren't changing quickly enough, or it's really hard and you're seeing people dealing with really awful things all the time. And at the same time, you keep turning up because you care and you want to make a difference and you know that you can. How do people kind of hold on to hope in that space when they're trying really hard and it's not necessarily going how they hope that it will, but they...
Yeah, well, I think, you know, people that go into this type of profession, whether it's family violence or disability or teaching or any number of professional roles, you know, it's often the role itself is not the problem. There's often other factors that really impact your ability to do the role properly, or as well as you could. It's really difficult, but how you manage that for yourself, I think you need, you know, a really good working environment that's supportive and with good supervision and a culture that really supports you. But not everybody gets that. I understand. So I think it's a journey that, you know, you work out how to do that for yourself. And I think having colleagues that you can, you know, you not just learn from, but you can confide in and you can support each other, you can back each other, you can get great, you know, to know that you're not alone. I mean, the reality is this social issue that we're living in, you know, mental health, whether it's family violence, mental health, you name it, there will never be enough government funding. How how you learn to focus on your job against all of these factors is for you to navigate. I've been there at different times in previous careers where I've really had, you know, fallen into being affected by things I can't control. And I think that's taught me some things that I hope when they come up again, I may handle differently and better. But that's called wisdom and insight. And that takes a journey of going through a hell of a lot of shitty and uncomfortable and difficult things to learn from. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Being prepared to learn, being prepared to consider, can I do something differently? What can I do perhaps when I can't change any of this? So how can I work with that? And I think it's not easy. And if it was easy, we wouldn't be in the situation we are. But to recognise it's really overwhelming. And I think, you know, people particularly in, you know, I can speak to in the family violence space, it's been horrendously unrelenting. And for every good reason, people are burnt out and exhausted. And yet, I'll tell you what, so many I know are still very committed into the role because of the amazing of their clients, the women and the kids and the families that they work with. They give them the inspiration to keep going. So, yeah, I haven't got all of the answers. Just to recognise this is tough.
It is, and that they're all really helpful things, I think, for people to take on board, because you can feel really deflated, I think, by working really hard and not having the things that you need. And it's about people.
Yeah. And to know, and look at, I suppose, having to look at how are you going to measure that you're making a difference and that your work matters. Because if you keep looking at the tsunami of people that are going to keep coming every day, because they do, how are you going to look at, well, I made a difference to that person's life, and how you can, learn how to recognize the things that give you the inspiration to keep going. How can you see those? Where to look for them, and to train yourself, I think, to see some of the good rather than being overwhelmed with all of the bad.
Yeah. We're seeing, I guess, in recent years, much more respect and acknowledgement for the importance of listening to people with lived experience. There's lots of councils and advisory groups in all sorts of spaces in mental health and drug and alcohol and disability and family violence. And you are on the first Victorian Victim Survivor Advisory Council. What was learnt as part of that process? Like, what would you not do again? What would you?
What I learnt was the bureaucracy of government. Good grief.
Well, we just had an announcement the other day about the new advisory council here.
Oh, have you got one now? Finally,
we do. About to kick off. So,
well, you
what
learn
should
a lot.
we do? And
you'll
what should
learn
we
a
not
lot
do?
about that with the bureaucracy of government. But it was the first one of its kind, and I've got some great friends within government. But I do recognise the bureaucracy of government, and there are many people working within government that do brilliant work and work really, really, really hard. It is a thankless task, and I've got great respect for a lot of the politicians I've met, because we expect so much from them and we give them very little. And maybe that's okay, but I think it can be, I think, quite thankless, to be frank. So I've done a lot of work with a lot of politicians, and previous Premier Will Hodgman was a really decent bloke, I found. So I think being able to channel your lived experience of systemic failures really helps. It helps you not to have a voice. And I think genuinely people have a genuine intent to learn. But sometimes it can appear tokenistic, and sometimes it's not set up properly and I think that's, again, a continued learnings for everybody involved. And there are things you didn't know that you were going to learn for everybody involved. And so I think that's an ongoing experience. People like, in the mental health areas and others have been doing this for a long time. Family violence, lived experience is more new. So there's still a lot to learn. Still a lot of time. It's a critical perspective that is required. It needs to be there, but we don't have all the answers either. We have a unique perspective, and not everyone with lived experience will agree to the same perspective, because it's all our own experiences. But as we learn to respect the perspective we all bring, and to value that contribution equally, that's where great change is able to happen. So it's an ongoing journey, and one that I think will very definitely continue.
And so then, we talk about listening to people with lived experience as kind of the first step, but what do you think are channels that people in leadership can take on board that kind of open a space for action and for change to happen?
Say again.
Like, how do we go beyond listening to people and acting on the things that are being heard?
Well, I think that's another thing, is being realistic about whether you're in a position for that kind of consultation to actually result into action. So there's a big conversation I can have, but I think it would take the rest of the evening on that. But what I can say is that I think, people come to things, whether they may be police or it may be, whatever your professional expertise also is very, very valuable. And so to respect that somebody who's had an experience, whether it's of the police treatment or court processes or failures of the system or a bad experience in a family violence refuge, whatever it may be, to create the opportunity, that the environment is very important, but also that to recognise that not to feel threatened by deeply listening to understand, so that really what you're wanting to share is that I don't want anyone else have to experience what I've just been through. I want to be able to contribute to something better. So it's leaving egos aside, isn't it? And really just trying to make it better for everyone. And I think it would seem that sometimes ego does get in the way, no matter who you are. So it's a continued challenge, really, isn't it?
Yeah, they're all continued challenges. And then we are running out of time, which is very sad. And so, I mean, you've said, you've spoken to hope in different ways, but I guess before we wrap up, sometimes it can feel like hope is something that's kind of in limited supply, like it might run out. How can we foster hope amongst each other?
I think sometimes I wonder about the word hope, because I think it's, what does it really, what is it? I know what it's like to feel hopeless. Hopeless is a horrible place to be. That's when you really feel that life isn't worth living and things will never change. And I can see, there is somebody in my book that I've shared, which is Olga Edwards, and her decision to take her life because her 2 children were murdered by her ex-partner was a decision I understood. He may as well have shot Olga at the same time, because she could never see the possibility of ever not feeling the pain and loss that she was living with. And I really understand that, because I don't know whether I ever believed I could wake up one day and not have that pain dragging me down every single day. I think I felt like that for 5 years. And if somebody said it was going to take you 5 years to start to not feel that pain, I would have felt that was too long. Too long, too hard. So I think hope for me is recognizing that just when I'm kind of getting cynical, or whether it's all feels overwhelming and I feel despair, often I will reach out to somebody, or something will come up, or I will meet somebody, and just that shifts me again to see the hope in that situation. And so, being hopeful isn't a continuous state of being, and it can, I find, it's very easy to feel despair about family violence. But when I hear somebody who's had transformed their life, move forward, met somebody, has got, married with children, and their experience of violence is historic. You realise, there are people, many people who move on in their lives and find the relationship and peace and happiness that they deserve. And I remember some years ago speaking at an event on the Sunshine Coast, quite a few years ago. And this old lady was there. She was an elderly lady, and she came up to me and she said, I've left him. I've left him. I heard your story and I've left him. And I can't remember everything else she said, but it was like she needed to see me. She needed to hear what I said. And it gave her whatever she was looking for. Now, I went back to the Sunshine Coast during one of our little spells when we got out between lockdowns, shot up to the Sunshine Coast, had to be back because another lockdown was coming. And I went and spoke again, and I saw this lady, and she got this lovely little bunch of flowers, and she came up to me, and I said, "You're that lady?" And she said, "I am." She said, "And let me tell you, I am so happy, and we're friends now." And I think that's what not just gives me hope, but how nice it is that over my 10-year journey of speaking in so many different places, people still come and hear me speak, who've heard me several times. And some of them I remember, and it's been lovely, so lovely that they still want to come and see me on my journey, see how I am now. And they, and I guess that's what gives us hope, isn't it? When we recognise in each other. I think, so I haven't got all the answers, but I'm still trying to find them. All I know is that we give each other hope. We give each other hope. And I think that, I feel very fortunate the opportunities I get and I'm invited to. It continues to reinforce for me why I do what I do. And I guess if that gives other people hope, they are giving me hope. Maybe it's reciprocal. You're giving me hope. You've turned up tonight. It would have been horrible if you hadn't.
And that, I think, is just a really beautiful way to end. So thank you for all of your generosity, for sharing your experience with us, for sharing your wisdom with us, for making us laugh, making us cry, for all of the changes that you have made. And yeah, we are really, really grateful that you could be here with us tonight. And I guess before we close, I would like to acknowledge the Tasmanian leaders who have been our partner in tonight's event and whose commitment to developing strong leadership across Tasmania is making a real difference. Yeah. So it's my pleasure to now invite the CEO of Tasmanian Leaders, Angela Driver, to offer Rosie our vote of thanks.
Thank you so much. My role here is really to, first of all, thank the University of Tasmania on behalf of Tasmanian Leaders for partnering with us on this event. Rosie is in Tasmania because she said yes, and hopefully at 4 o'clock you weren't regretting that. She came down to speak with the 2024 Tasmanian Leaders Program after already committing to speak with the previous year. And we're very pleased to have been able to open this up to a wider audience, so thank you so much for coming along tonight. Hope has been a theme of Tasmanian Leaders since we chose it for our symposium last year. And there isn't a program or a day that goes by without it coming up as an essential ingredient to leadership. It's not just about wishful thinking, though. It's about active doing. And I don't think there's any more Australian. I've just called you a Tasmanian. Welcome.
I have thought about retiring here.
Who demonstrates that belief that things can be different, but not just that belief, that you're actively pursuing that. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you as well, Carmel, for facilitating tonight and leading us through, and for weaving in some of our questions as well. That was a really beautiful addition. For anyone curious about leadership or about Tasmanian Leaders, we have a website. Please reach out. Because together, and as Rosie said, together we can do this, but we need to do it together because no one can do this alone. Life is precious. It takes all of us, and it takes a long time. Thank you for coming tonight, and thanks Rosie and Carmel.
Thank you.